So today, today I would like to talk about how in the medieval times the French company called Compagnie des Indes was able to first realize that they were much superior in their military capabilities than an Indian army. And this was not the case for a long time after they had come to India. And in this video, I'll talk about a battle called the Battle of Adyar River, which gave them a realization that they could really get their foot into India and carry out entrepreneurship in different ways. So firstly, in this video, I'll talk about the Battle of Adyar River and then the consequences it had brought about for this company, the French company, which had initially wanted to come and carry out trade in cotton textiles and majorly cotton textiles, and then jewels, chins, spices. Later on, this battle would give them a realization that they could also carry out military entrepreneurship and hire out their militaries, and they would also understand that military entrepreneurship was much more profitable than the conventional trade that they had come to carry out. Now, let me just directly get into the Battle of Adyar River. Let me give you a small background of the Battle of Adyar River. So, I would like to take you back to 1745. Actually, between 1740 and 1748, there was a war that was happening in Europe called the War of Austrian Succession. In this war, a number of European countries had fought in the opposing sides, and France and Britain had also fought in the opposing sides of this war. France and Britain also had companies that had come to India and carry out trade and make profits from it. And the war had spilled over to the Indian territory as well. This was not a time when Britain had its colonies in India. It was still trading. The merchants were still trading, and East India Company was carrying out its business. During that war, as the war spilled into India, the British Navy had come and attacked some French possessions in South India. Just a second, yeah. In South India on 1745, on Feb 1745. And the French had their headquarters at a place near Tamil Nadu called Pondicherry. And the British had attacked a number of ships, not only in Pondicherry, but also some regions near Pondicherry, number of ships of the French. And this brought retaliation from the French. The French company was under the directorship of a general called Joseph Francois Dupleix. So the French company retaliated against this British naval aggression against the company, Compagnie des Indes. And the East India Company had a possession in South India called Madras. It was not exactly administered by them, but they had this possession where they could carry out trade. So initially in 1639, there was a local ruler who had given this land Madras to the East India Company as a land grant, and it had stayed that way, and the company had improved this land and they had the possession of Madras from that time. So coming back to the story, the French company had attacked the British East India Company's possession, Madras, and then they had defeated the troops of the East India Company in 1746. And not only that, the French troops had also occupied the region of Madras, and the British were, I told you, British did not have the administrative jurisdiction over the entire area. It lied with a governor of the Mughals called the Nawab of Carnatic. Carnatic composed largely of the present day Andhra, Tamil Nadu. So Nawab of Carnatic was controlling that Madras region, and firstly, he did not like the fact that the French company had attacked his jurisdiction without his permission. Secondly, he would also be insulted that a mere private company would come to his territory and would refuse to leave even after his insistence. So basically, he wanted the Nawab of Carnatic called Anwaruddin. He wanted to teach a lesson to the French company, and he sent a large Mughal army of 10,000 soldiers under his son called Mahfuz Khan. The Mughal troops would reach a place where a river called the Adyar River would meet the ocean Bay of Bengal, an estuary of Adyar River. At this location, the Mughal army would blockade the French troops that were being taken as reinforcements by one of the generals of the French company called Paradis. While this blockade occurred, I would like to take an account of a secretary of the director of the French company Duplay called Ananda Rangapillai. He had written an account, and according to him, the French prepared for the battle in a certain way. The French, as I told you, were under the control of the general called Paradis, and he would divide the French troops, just 700 of them, into small groups so that each group deals with a certain section of the Mughal army, the 10,000 strong Mughal army. And Paradis himself would be the head of that group, which would be at the forefront. And then once the battle had begun, the Mughals had attacked the French with 3 rockets and 4 cannons. But this wouldn't cause much harm to the French troops. Ultimately, the contents, the rockets and the cannons would fall into the Adyar River. Quite unsuccessful. Next, the French would carry out their attack. They had these long guns called muskets. They also had this fast-moving long guns on the battlefield called the artillery. There would be continuous firing from the French troops, and it was something that was never seen before in the Indian soil before that. This kind of firing, where a column of troops lined up in rows would fire, one row after another. One row would fire and would go back to the back of the column, and then the next row would come and start firing, and this would lead to continuous firing, and this is called volley firing or volley shots. This was something that was never seen before in India at that time. Many of the Mughal troops would be killed by this continuous firing, and a lot of them would leave their weapons. Once again, this is the account of the secretary of Duplay called Ananda Rangapillai. A lot of the Mughal troops would leave their weapons and flee and would try to flee from the site, and in the process many of them would perish as well. There was also a moment when the commander of the Mughal army, Mahfuz Khan himself, would be running on foot and trying to climb on an elephant to escape to a safe spot. Ultimately, he would go to a region which is 25 kilometers away from Madras, southeast of Madras called Kunatur and reach a safe spot there. A lot of the other troops would also do the same. Ultimately, what this says was that the French army had comprehensively ousted a large army of the Mughals, 10,000 strong troops of the Mughals. A French army of 700 would easily oust them with their uh, better developed weaponry and their military. So this was the account of Anand Rangapillai, the director of French company Dupleix. There was also an account from the court historian of the Nawabs of Carnatic. And according to this account, the Mughals had lost, but there were some reasons that were given for this. The account said that the French had attacked the Mughals at night, and therefore the Mughals were unexpecting it, and therefore the Mughal troops were caught wanting. Whatever be the reason, it is known historically that the Mughal Carnatic army had been comprehensively ousted in this battle. Nothing like this had happened before this battle, called the Battle of Adyar River. Way back in 1689, the East India Company attacked the Mughal Empire, and the company was ousted comprehensively by the war machine of Aurangzeb at that time. According to historian William Dalrymple, the troops of the East India Company were ousted so badly that it felt as if the war machine was swatting flies. He was comparing the Mughal troops, the East India Company troops, the performance of the East India Company troops. So you must be wondering what really brought this change in the military setup of a European company, in this case the French company, that had brought this stark difference in a way that caused ousting of the Mughal army. Firstly, it has got to do with the wars that the European nations had fought back in Europe, and this led to a lot of military development in the 17th and 18th centuries. Let me tell you what kind of developments that had been brought at that time, the innovations that were brought at that time. There was this introduction of these long guns called muskets, which had this stone called flint that could give a spark to cause fire for an explosion within the gun. They were called flintlock muskets. There were also these fast-moving long guns on the battlefield called artillery. The thing is, they were fast-moving. That was the development. And not only that, there was also a different kind of weaponry that was introduced, where a sword or a knife would be attached to the end of the gun, or a rifle or a barrel of a gun. They were called bayonets. A special type of bayonets were introduced into the European army. And there was also this innovation of screws that were added into the guns that gave a better flexibility to the guns. The degrees of freedom, flexibility in the degrees of freedom of the gun, of that long gun called muskets. This improved precision of the shots of the muskets, and therefore caused development in the weaponry of the Europeans. Not only this, the Europeans were also divided, the military was also divided into certain groups, large groups and small groups. The large groups were called brigades and the smaller ones were called battalion. This kind of arrangement into groups helped in continuous firing in the battlefield and also some complex maneuvering on the battlefield. This was also another advancement in the military setup of the Europeans. If you were to sum up all these advancements and see what happened in India at that time, the standard tactics that were used by the European army was first the continuous firing from the muskets supported by the artillery, and then there would be a charge from the bayonets. So this was the tactic that was used, and it would continue for a century after it was first used in Indian soil at that time. So the Battle of Adyar River happened on 24th October 1746. And now I would like to take you forward to 1749. The War of Austrian Succession had concluded, and there was a treaty called the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which ensured that the Madras, which was initially a possession of East India Company, was restored back to East India Company by the French based on this treaty. However, there was insecurity about future wars as well. The French troops were not disbanded, but they were used in a different way. So let me tell you what are the ways that were used. How the French troops were used. Back then, in the 18th century, India was divided into a number of independent kingdoms, especially after the death of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707. And these small independent kingdoms had suffered from internal turmoil, the turmoil of the battles of succession. Often there used to be multiple claimants to the thrones, and this was taken as an advantage by the French company. Not only the French company, but also the other European companies. Here I take the example of the French company. So what the European companies had done is they would covertly give support to one of the claimants to the throne in return for favors from the claimant. For example, in the case of the French company supported one of the claimants to the throne of Nawab of Carnatic back then, and in return they would get the favor in the form of the right to collect revenue, land revenue. The favors not only took the form of land revenue, but also there were direct monetary benefits or a grant of land. Let me take another example, this time also a case of the French company. The French company had interfered in the internal matters covertly by supplying troops to one of the claimants of the throne of Hyderabad at that time. Hyderabad was created by a trusted general of Aurangzeb called Nizamul Mulk. And after his death, his sons had fought for the throne of Hyderabad, and one of the claimants had taken assistance of the military of the French company in return, and in return he would give Dupleix some favors, the director of the French company some favors. Dupleix would get a land grant worth 77,500 euros, which in present terms is more than 8 million euros. Dupleix would also get a very high rank in the Mughal administration. He would get the rank where he could possess 700 horses and a handsome salary. Not only this, Dupleix would also get a rich port near the Coromandel coast called Masulipattnam. In addition to this, Dupleix would also get a landed estate that was worth 20,000 euros, which in present terms is 2 million euros. So I hope you got the flavor of the favors that the claimants to the throne would provide in return for military assistance. What this compensation had done is it had not only helped these companies like the French company to maintain its army, but also to finance the trade it had conventionally come to carry out, the trade of cotton textiles, the trade in spices, the trade in jewels, and also chins and many other items. So there were many benefits, and what was ultimately found out was that this kind of hiring out military to a certain claimant of the throne was far more profitable than the conventional trade that had come to carry out. So now the companies, including the East India Company, had hired out their military to get profits from hiring it out. So they had become military entrepreneurs in addition to the conventional trade that they had carried out. The finances, the revenues, the money they would get from as favors would be used to finance the conventional trade. They would no longer import bullion, that is gold and silver, from Europe, but finance it from within India itself. So this is how the Battle of Adyar River for the first time had made a French company realize that their military might was far superior than that of the Mughal armies in South India. A small, well-disciplined army with superior weaponry could defeat a large Mughal army with ease. And this had consequences, benefits for the French company in the form of carrying out military entrepreneurship and making large profits. I hope you found this video interesting, the video about the Battle of Adyar River. Thank you.